The rain was not just falling. The sky over the German highway had literally torn open, turning the world into a continuous torrent of muddy, heavy water. When Ostap's white Mercedes Sprinter pulled into a remote roadside parking lot, the windshield was already cracking under the blows of the furious wind and hail. The navigator went completely dark, mobile connection vanished, and the water around the minibus began to rise rapidly, blocking the wheels. There were 8 passengers in the cabin, traveling from Przemyśl to Paris. They realized they were trapped in the middle of a night forest when the Sprinter's headlights caught the only building in this parking lot from the darkness. An old wooden motel with completely boarded-up windows, on the threshold of which stood a fresh, absolutely dry umbrella. The cold water was rising with every passing minute. The Sprinter's engine coughed a few times and died. Ostap tried to start it again, but the starter only spun helplessly, emitting a dry, metallic screech. The generator gave up. The dashboard flickered a few times and finally went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Only the dim hazard lights of a neighboring truck, standing at the other end of the parking lot with no signs of life, pierced the wall of water. "Ostap, what are we going to do?" came the trembling voice of the student Andrew from the front seat. "We'll drown right here in the car." Ostap looked out the side window. The water had already reached the lower edge of the doors. Remaining in a metal box in the middle of a rapidly flooding lowland was deadly dangerous. "Take the essentials, your documents, and get out quickly," Ostap commanded, trying to keep his voice calm. "We are moving to that motel on the hill. At least it's dry there." A slight commotion arose in the cabin. An elderly couple, Mr. Dmitri and Mrs. Maria, huddled close to each other in fear. 2 migrant workers who had been silent the whole way were now actively helping the tourist girls pack their backpacks. Ostap opened the side door. The icy water instantly stung his legs, reaching almost to his knees. One by one, the passengers stepped out into the pouring wall of rain, holding hands so the wind wouldn't knock them off their feet. Overcoming the strong resistance of the water and wind, the group finally reached the wooden porch of the old motel. It was a 2-story building made of gray wood, darkened by time. All of its windows on the first floor were boarded up with thick planks. A heavy, rusty chain hung on the door, but its lock was open. What struck Ostap most was a detail he had noticed from the car. A large black umbrella lay on the wooden railing of the porch. It was absolutely dry, as if it had been placed there only a second ago, completely ignoring the raging hurricane around. "Is anyone inside?" Ostap shouted loudly, pushing the heavy oak doors. The doors gave way with a deep creak. The passengers literally tumbled inside, breathing heavily and shivering from the cold. Ostap shut the door behind them, cutting off the roaring of the storm. A relative silence fell over the room, broken only by the monotonous hum of the rain beating against the roof. Inside, there was a smell of old pine needles, dust, and dry wood. It was a spacious lobby with a fireplace, furnished with old furniture. There was no electricity here at all. Andrew turned on the flashlight on his phone, dispersing the darkness. The beam of light caught old paintings on the walls, a reception desk covered in a thick layer of dust, and an absolutely clean, dry table in the middle of the room, on which stood a lit kerosene lamp. The wick was barely smoldering, casting a faint yellow light. "Does someone live here?" one of the tourist girls whispered, pressing close to her friend. "Doesn't look like it," replied Ivan, a worker walking up to the desk. "There's so much dust here. It looks like no one has entered this place for 10 years. But the lamp is lit, and the umbrella outside. Maybe someone else escaped the rain right before us?" Andrew suggested. Ostap silently walked up to the fireplace. Dry firewood lay nearby. Realizing that the people were completely soaked and might get sick, he quickly lit a fire using his driver's matches. Within a few minutes, the room was filled with pleasant warmth and the crackle of dry logs. The passengers began to sit around the fire, taking off their wet jackets. The tension eased slightly, but the feeling that they were not alone did not leave Ostap for a single moment. He decided to inspect the building. Taking a flashlight, Ostap walked slowly down the long corridor of the first floor. The doors to the rooms were slightly open. Inside, there were only old beds with bare mattresses. Everything looked abandoned. Suddenly, a quiet, distinct sound came from the second floor. Creak, creak. Those were footsteps. Someone was walking slowly on the wooden floor right above the lobby where the passengers were warming themselves. The steps were heavy, measured. Ostap stopped. His heart beat faster. He turned off the flashlight so as not to draw attention and listened. The footsteps reached the stairs leading down to the lobby and suddenly stopped. "Who's there?" Ostap asked loudly, trying to make his voice sound confident. No one answered. Only the wind outside the walls howled louder, as if trying to tear the old motel to pieces. He returned to the lobby. The passengers had already warmed up a bit. Mrs. Maria took out the remaining sandwiches from her bag and shared them with the others. But the cozy atmosphere vanished instantly when Andrew suddenly stood up, staring at the reception desk. "Guys, look at the guestbook," he whispered, pointing a trembling finger at an old guest registry lying under the kerosene lamp. Ostap came closer. The registry was open to today's page. On the yellow paper in fresh ink that hadn't even managed to dry completely, names were neatly written. Ostap began to read to himself, and a freezing cold washed over his skin. All of them were written there. Ostap, Andrew, Maria, Dmitri, Ivan. All 8 passengers of the Przemyśl, Paris minibus. Opposite each name was the arrival time, 03:15. That was the exact time they had crossed the threshold of this motel. But the most terrifying was the last line. It read, "The number of beds for overnight stay is limited. Only those who do not leave the room will survive until morning." "This is some kind of sick joke," Ivan laughed nervously, though his face turned noticeably pale. "Someone is mocking us." "The umbrella, the fresh entry, the footsteps upstairs," Andrew listed, backing away to the fireplace. "This is no joke. We shouldn't have entered here at all. We need to go back to the bus." "To what bus?" Ostap cut him off sharply. "The water's up to the windows there. We'll just be washed away into the river if we go outside now. There's a hurricane out there." Suddenly, the kerosene lamp on the table flared with a bright blue flame and went out. The only source of light was the fire in the fireplace, which began to die down rapidly, despite the fact that there was still plenty of wood. The shadows on the lobby walls began to lengthen unnaturally, moving in sync with the monotonous sound of the rain outside the window. From the second-floor corridor, footsteps were heard again. This time, they were faster. They were approaching the stairs. Creak, creak, creak. All the passengers gathered close to the dying fireplace. Ostap pointed his flashlight forward, aiming the beam at the dark wooden stairs. From the darkness of the second floor, a figure slowly descended the stairs. It was an elderly man in an old raincoat of the German road service. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes looked at the people with a deep, unutterable sadness. In his hands, he held the very same black umbrella that Ostap had seen on the porch. "You shouldn't have stopped here," the old man said quietly but very clearly in pure Ukrainian. "This parking lot. It was closed 30 years ago, after the rain washed away the bridge further down the highway." "Who are you?" Ostap asked, holding the flashlight with both hands, which were shaking noticeably. "I was a driver, just like you, boy," the old man smiled sadly. "I was also driving to Paris. I was also carrying people. And I also decided to wait out the storm here. We all stayed in this room. Forever." The old man raised the umbrella and pointed it at the door. "The rain will not stop while you are here. The motel takes those who seek easy shelter from the storm. If you stay in these walls until morning, your names will remain in that registry forever. Run to the car." "But there's water there," Andrew cried. "The water is just an illusion drawn by this house to keep you from leaving," the old man replied quietly, and began to dissolve slowly into the darkness of the lobby, leaving behind only the smell of wet grass. Ostap didn't wait a single second. His driver's instinct told him this was their only chance. "Everyone, follow me, quick!" he shouted, grabbing Mrs. Maria by the hand. He burst through the heavy oak doors of the motel with his shoulder. The passengers ran out into the street. The rain was still raging, the wind knocking them off their feet, but when Ostap shone his flashlight on the parking lot, he saw a strange thing. The water, which had just reached their knees, turned out to be only small puddles on the asphalt. There was no flood at all. They ran to the Sprinter. Ostap quickly inserted the key into the ignition. The engine started instantly, roaring smoothly and powerfully under the hood. The headlights pierced the darkness of the forest, and the navigator showed a clear route to the German border again. The vehicle sped off, leaving the old wooden motel behind. When the white Sprinter finally entered the outskirts of sunny Paris in the morning, the passengers were still silent, trying to process the events of the past night. They said their warm goodbyes to Ostap, tightly shaking his hand. Ostap was left alone in the cabin. He decided to clean the interior and walk to the back row of seats. There, where none of the passengers had sat, a large black umbrella lay on the floor. It was absolutely dry, and next to it lay a small scrap of old, yellow paper with a neat inscription in ink. "Thank you for saving your people. Have a safe journey, Ostap."